Hello guys, so in the last class we had finished the geometrical isomerism and I had explained you what is stereoisomerism, how geometrical isomerism works, what are the conditions, what are different cases are there. We understood what are the chiral centers are there. So all these information we've already done in geometrical isomerism. Now today we'll be starting optical isomerism, but again just to recall what we had learned in stereoisomerism beginning. So when I started stereoisomerism, I told you there are three type of things which we'll be discussing, or three types of isomerism which we'll be discussing. One is going to be geometrical isomerism, then optical, and then third is conformational. So before that I had given you some background information that what exactly is stereoisomerism. So that is I'm going to quickly recap so that you will be able to relate it much better when you'll be doing it this time, when you'll be doing in optical isomerism. So what exactly is stereoisomerism? It is a type of isomerism which arises due to difference in the arrangement of the groups in space. So when I say in space, that means the molecular formula and the actual structural formula is also same. The name of the compound is also same. The only difference is how the molecules have been attached to carbon in a 3D geometry. So for example, if this is my molecule, all of you, I hope you can see this. This is my molecule. So right now, this yellow is here. I mean, you can say that these. Let's suppose these are four groups, and these four groups have been arranged like this. If I change the arrangement and I bring this purple one here and the yellow one here, so basically the molecule is not changing, or you can say the compound is not changing. Molecule is changing in terms of how the arrangement in space has been done. So earlier, if this is my viewpoint, if this is how I'm viewing it, the molecule, now in front of me I have this yellow ball and the white ball behind. Okay, so these two molecules are towards me, and this purple molecule and the blue molecule is away from me. Whereas in the earlier scenario, what was the thing? In earlier scenario, the purple one and the white one was towards me, and the blue one and the yellow one was towards you. So that's not making a difference in the chemical formula of the molecule, but arrangement is definitely changing, and any changes due to these change in arrangement happens comes under the stereoisomerism. So basically the molecules, when their attachments changes with respect to a carbon in 3D geometry, that is called as stereoisomerism. So what all things will be there, what all things will be same, what all things will be different in stereoisomerism? We will have same molecular formula. So molecular formula will not change, degree of unsaturation will not change, IUPAC name will not change. So as I mentioned, the molecule as a whole will remain same. So the molecular formula is not gonna change, even the name of the compound is not gonna change, and compound itself is not gonna change. It's like it will have two different types if you change the arrangement of the atoms. The molecule will still remain same. If it's an alcohol, let's say this is an alcoholic group, this is C2H5 group, this is hydrogen, and this is CH3. It's just I'm moving this alcoholic group from here to here, and C2H5 group from here to here. So basically molecule is still gonna remain alcohol, and it's not gonna change as such as a compound name. So name is also gonna remain exactly same, only the arrangement of molecules are gonna change. So we say, we also call it as stereochemical formula is gonna change. Stereochemical formula is the 3D arrangement with, I mean, it's a formula which tells us the 3D arrangement of the molecule. Okay, so stereochemical formula is the one which tells us about the 3D arrangement of the molecule, how molecules have been arranged in the space, how a viewer can view it, what all is away from the viewer, and what all is towards the viewer, what all molecules a viewer can view towards and away from the viewer's eye. All that arrangement which changes is called as stereochemical formula. Okay, so this is the basics of stereoisomerism which you have already learned. Does it makes a lot of difference when we talk about the change in the arrangement of the molecules? Ideally, when you see in most of the cases, no, you won't even able to feel out the differences. You will not be able to figure out the differences until unless there are some specific cases happening where the arrangement of molecule is actually affecting the chemical reaction. Okay, and those cases, or you can say those instances, are relatively lesser. So basically in general 90 to 95% properties remain same. or the appearance remains same, or you can say the behavior remains same. I must not say 90 to 95%, but for most of the molecules, you won't be able to figure out much differences. Their basic behavior will remain same, but few chemical properties will change if the arrangement of the molecules is changing. Okay, for example, we had noticed such compounds where there when we change the spatial arrangement, when we change their arrangement with respect to the 3D geometry, and it makes a difference in their compounds. Okay, such kind of compounds, I have written it over here, I've listed down some where we had seen the differences in their properties due to the change in the arrangement of the molecules or substituent groups or attachments in the 3D geometry. So there is one citalopram. This is an antidepressant which is produced by racemic mixture, but only S plus form is responsible for its beneficial effect. So basically there is a medicine called as citalopram, which is an antidepressant. I hope all of you understand what is antidepressant. So it is produced as a racemic mixture. What exactly is the racemic mixture? Racemic mixture is mixture of two optical isomers, mixture of two equal optical isomers of a compound. So we will understand in detail what exactly is the optical isomers and what is racemic mixture. So racemic mixture is nothing else but, let's say I have a compound, let's say X, okay, and X can exist in two forms. One is plus form and one is minus form. One plus form is one isomer and another minus form is another isomer. So we will write it as plus X and minus X. That only tells you about that the molecule is still same, the compound is still same, only the optical activity is different due to the change in the arrangement of the molecule. So when both of these kind of isomers have been taken 50-50% mixed together, then the compound is called as racemic mixture. And we also represent the configuration as S and R for these racemic mixtures. One we represent by plus and minus, another we represent by S and R. So these are some representations which you will be learning forward. So if a compound is, let's say, S and plus, there is going to be R and minus. R is also a kind of a configuration and minus is also a kind of representation that how the optical activity behaves in a certain molecule. Okay, so here this particular compound would have two forms, S and R, plus and minus, but only S form of it and the plus form of it is responsible for its beneficial effects. That means the thing which actually helps in the antidepressant medicine what we have taken, though we were initially taking the racemic mixture means it has S form of the compound also and R form of the compound also. S and R, you can just take it as how we have learned cis and trans and alkenes. Exactly same way there are isomers which are called as S and R, and similarly there is a rotation which is plus and minus, which I'll be telling you. I mean, the optical isomers can be represented by plus and minus. So these are some forms of a particular compound in different isomeric forms. So S and plus form of a compound, of this compound citalopram, is actually beneficial. R and minus is not beneficial, though it is present in that racemic mixture. It is not actually showing any impact, or it is not having any medicinal beneficial effect on any patient who is using this antidepressant. So other part is actually useless and only one part of it is useful. So basically 50% of it is useful, 50% of it is not useful for so and so disease. Okay, exactly same way we have penicillamine. This is also one type of medicine which is used for treating arthritis. Okay, so when we talk about this compound penicillamine, this can also have two type of isomers. One is D isomer and one is L isomer. Now when you talk about the D isomer, it is pretty useful in treating the arthritis, whereas if you talk about the L isomer, that is actually toxic. So if somebody by mistakes take L, or some medicine company do not check the isomers very properly and gives L instead of D, because the compound name is still same, they just change the isomer and give, then rather than being helpful for a particular disease, it will actually cause a lot of toxic properties in the body. It can cause different other problems in the human body. Okay, similarly we have glucose also have two forms. One is D, another is L. Again, this D and L are the isomers of glucose, though the formula is still same. Formula is C6H12O6, only it has two forms. one is D and another is L. When you talk about the D glucose, this is something which human body can digest. If you talk about the L glucose, it cannot be digested by the human body but can be digested by the other animal's body. Okay, so there, so basically majority glucose, no matter you talk about the D glucose or L glucose, both will be sweet, both will have other properties all same, but here comes the small difference. So that those small differences are due to the configurational change, or you can say the arrangement change in a 3D geometry of a molecule. So those changes won't be visible in a broader perspective, but in specific cases, in a very specific areas, you will be able to see that these isomers behave differently, and that is what the importance of these isomers, because these are used. I mean, similarly, there was one drug long back which was used for, I think, I'm not very sure, but yeah, I think it was for chicken pox or something. And then it was one medicine was prepared by some chemists. I mean, after discovery, they got to know, okay, this is the compound which is helpful for chicken pox, and they had given that medicine, and they didn't notice that there are two isomers of that compound. One is D and another is L, or one is plus and another is minus, and they took it as a generic thing. Half of, or you can say many of the companies, that particular compound was actually very useful in treating the chickenpox, whereas in other cases it was completely ineffective. So at that time, it was the first time when people got to know, or the chemists got to know, that it's not about just a compound, but it's isomeric form also, that which exactly isomeric form you should be using. And then they got to know that one particular isomer of that compound is useful for treating chickenpox, not the other one. So there are many such examples. Mostly these optical isomers are useful in biomolecules, and you can say chemistry, biochemistry and all that, and it has a very wide range of importance. So we will be understanding the basics of optical chemistry, or basics of optical isomerism, how it gets originated, what is the basis, and how do we decide which isomer is which, and other factors which can affect the optical activity of a compound. We already know how the stereoisomers can be divided. Stereoisomers can be configurational. This we have already done. I'm just quickly recapping. And another is conformational. When you talk about configurational, these are the ones which can be isolable. That means there are difference in the properties due to which they can be separated out from each other. And such compounds are enantiomers and diastereomers. Enantiomers is one type, diastereomers is another type. Enantiomers are further divided into erythro and theo, and diastereomers are further divided into geometrical diastereomers and optical diastereomers. So erythro and theo are also optical. Okay, geometrical isomers, what we have learned till now, or whatever we have studied in geometrical isomerism, those are always considered geometrical diastereomers. So geometrical isomers are diastereomers. They are neither enantiomers nor erythro-threo, nothing. So erythro-threo, or you can say enantiomers and optical diastereomers, are the parts of optical isomerism. So in optical isomerism, you will understand what exactly is the enantiomers means, what exactly is the diastereom means, and these two terms are very specifically used for optical isomers. Conformational isomers are the ones which are non-isolable. That means though they are changing their position, or they are changing their attachments with respect to the 3D geometry, but the transition from one isomer to another isomer is so fast, or requires so less energy, that they are always interconvertible with each other, and that energy cannot be useful in separating those isomers with each other. So basically these conformational isomers require very less energy to convert from one form to another, or change their spatial arrangement, and that's why the energy is so less that they are always in move, they are always in the process of converting from one form to another, and that is why these are non-isolable, and we also call them identical. I mean, there is no difference in their properties, hence they are considered as identical. Okay, so let's begin with the optical isomerism now. This is the basic fundas which we have already learned before. I have just quickly recapped so that you guys, if you have forgot it, you can recall it, and optical isomerism will make more sense to you now. Okay, so now let's begin with the optical isomerism. But before starting with the optical isomerism, I want to discuss about few important terms so that you get the basic understanding. And the first term what we are going to talk about is light. So what is light? Light is an electromagnetic wave which basically vibrates in all the directions. It doesn't have a fixed polarity, it may go, it basically spreads throughout, it gets distributed evenly in the overall environment, it is oriented in every possible manner. So it consists of waves. Light is nothing else but it is an unpolarized, let's not use the word unpolarized, it is the group of waves which are moving in all the possible directions. It is an electromagnetic wave which is moving in all the possible directions. Now, what exactly is the plane polarized light means? Plane polarized light is nothing else but when you restrict the plane of the electromagnetic wave, or when you restrict the plane of a light, that is called as plane polarized light. So how do you restrict it? As I mentioned, it is light has the electromagnetic waves which moves in all the direction. So you use something which basically, you use such a device or you use such a equipment or anything like that which basically absorbs or which basically neglect all the directions, all the waves which are moving in random directions, and just focus on one single direction. It is like if you have a substance like this, just see here, if I have a substance like this which has only a vertical slit, and you want to pass this kind of substance through it, just look at it carefully. So if I want to pass this kind of thing which is multi-directional, and if you pass it, if you want to pass it through a single straight vertical slit, what part of it will be able to pass through and rest of all will get neglected? All the other direction stuff will get neglected, and only the one single straight wave can pass through, because the slit is vertical, slit is not in all the directions. So that's how we restrict the plane of the light. So this is when we restrict the plane of the light, or when the light moves only in single plane, and all other lights or all other waves which were moving in the different other planes are neglected or rejected or removed or absorbed, whatever. So basically it's not what you are getting on the screen. You had the light waves moving in all the directions, but what you are perceiving on the other end after passing through the device is just one single plane line light. Then it is called as plane polarized light. Okay, so look at here, if you can see this, this is my unpolarized light. Unpolarized means the ones which have the light waves moving in all the directions or oscillating in all the different planes. Now it has been passed through this filter. So filter has those, as I told you, the vertical slits. So when it will pass through the vertical slits, only vertical vector of it will be able to pass through, rest of all will get removed or will get rejected or will get basically reflected back, right? So you can see out of all these vectors of light, only the one which was vertical could pass through. So this is called as plane polarized light, which oscillates only in the single plane. Okay, so what we do is we first of all take the plane polarized light to figure out the optical activity. How do we derive, or how do we get this plane polarized light? By using the polarizing filter which is generally in the Nicol prism. Nicol prism. Okay, Nicol prism is also drawn as like this. That's how they draw it, Nicol prism. Okay, so if you have the light passing through it, you will get it in one single direction. You write, I have drawn it like this. At multiple places it has been drawn like this. So basically they are just showing the direction of the slit through which the light can be passed, and you will get a plane polarized light. Then we will be putting then we will see how this plane polarized light behave when it will be passed through any organic chemistry or organic chemical sample. Okay, so I will take an organic sample or organic compound in a tube. Okay, that tube I have taken, and now when the light will be passed through that organic compound, how does it behave? So there are three possibilities over here. One possibility is if the light is passing through this tube, it is going straight, basically no change in the direction. Okay, other possibility is it is, so let's say this is my tube and the chemical has been filled over here, and this is my plane polarized light. Three possible cases are there. The organic compound which is filled inside is generally has the I mean we mentioned the concentration as in grams. Concentration is mentioned in grams per ml. Okay, and the length of this you can say tube is calculated in decimeter. So concentration is mentioned as C grams per ml and the length is mentioned as decimeter. Okay. Now there are three possibilities. One is the light comes out unaffected. Another possibility is that the direction of the light gets changed and it tilts towards the left with the theta angle. Okay, and other possibility is that this light tilts toward the right with the theta angle. So theta is the angle which actually tells you how much rotation has happened. So I can just write it as, let's say this was my original light and it got rotated to this, rotated this way, then this is a theta angle through which it is rotated. And if this was the light originally, or this was the plane, or this is how the original plane polarized light was and it got rotated like this, then this is your theta angle. I hope it is clear. So theta is nothing else but the degree through which it is rotating towards the left or towards the right is called as theta, and that is the angle of rotation through which the light has got rotated when it got passed through the organic compound, which is basically moving the light towards left or right, or the one which is capable of tilting the light towards left or right or changing its direction. Such kind of compound is called as optically active compound. Optically active compound. And the case in which there is no change in the angle of the light and it is coming exactly same way, then the compound which we have taken is optically inactive. So optically active is one thing, optically inactive is another thing. Optically active will be capable of moving the plane polarized, or will be able to shift, or will be able to tilt the light towards left or right with a theta angle. Whereas when you talk about optically inactive compound, in that case there will be no change in the plane polarized light. Whichever plane it was in earlier will come out in exactly same manner. Okay, so this is what exactly happens when we talk about generating a plane polarized light and then see the optical activity. So this setup is to see the optical activity. Here you can see this was an optically active compound, and this was the light which was vertically on in a this was vertical, this was on the vertical plane, got tilted a bit when passed through this optically active compound, and the angle change happened is alpha. They have called it as angle of rotation. It is the exactly same thing which I was talking about, which I mentioned as theta. Okay, and then there is an analyzer over here, which is nothing else but is the one which actually calculates the angle, how much angle rotation has happened in the left side or the right side. Okay, so this is how the optically active compound changes the rotation of the plane polarized light. And as I mentioned, how does the plane polarized light look like? This is my unpolarized light when it is passed through the polarizer. There can be many type of polarizer. What we are using or what we are studying is the Nicol prism. When you pass the unpolarized light through it, it will become the plane polarized light, but that means it will be moving in the single direction. When it will be passed through the sample tube with a solution of optically active compound, and the rotation will happen either in the right direction or in the left direction depending upon the compound, and that angle through which it got rotated will be called as angle of rotation or optical angle of rotation. And then it is judged through the analyzer that how much change has happened in the angle of the plane polarized light, no matter it is in the left direction or it is in the right direction. For left direction also there is a notation which represents that the light has moved towards the left, and there is a notation which represents the light has moved towards the right, and that representation is nothing else but plus and minus. Plus represents that light has moved in the right direction, or the angle has changed towards the right, whereas negative represents the angle has moved towards the left. So let's talk about it in much more detail. So you can see here in this GIF how the unpolarized light is being passed through the polarizer and is getting converted into linear polarized light. This is just to show you how exactly polarizers work. As I mentioned, the light can be moved or can rotate its angle when it passed through an optically active chemical compound or organic compound. If it is moving in the right direction or if the rotation is in the right direction, then it is represented by plus or small d, or the term called as dextro. such kind of rotation or such kind of compounds which are giving you the right rotation are also called as dextrorotatory. Dextrorotatory means the ones which can rotate the plane polarized towards the right direction. Similarly, if the rotation is happening in the left, then it is represented by levo, L or minus. Either of the terms you can use, and the compound will be called as levorotatory. So plus and minus, whether the angle is a plus or minus, or whether the rotation is towards the left or right, can be only measured through the polarimeter. And I have shown you in the last slide where the polarimeter is. At the end, when the analyzer is, where the analyzer is kept, there exactly is the polarimeter, which basically calculates the exact angle through which the movement has happened, or the angle what has got changed for a plane polarized light in the right direction or in the left direction. So this is about how to judge the optical activity of a compound. What is the basis of judging it? Not exactly what is the basis of judging it, but what can you see when a compound is optically active. Now we have to understand what exactly is the optical active compound means, and why this optical activity arises. Okay, so before we understand the optical activity, I had explained you how optically activity can be visible through the experiment, but what all different other terms are there which are required to understand the optical isomerism? Let's go to the second term. The second term is chiral center. Now, what exactly is the chiral center? Chiral center is the term which is specifically being used for an sp3 atom. So you just cannot use it for any other type of atom. Atom has to be mandatorily an sp3 atom, which must have four different groups attached to it. What do we mean by four different groups? Carbon has tetravalency, four bonds are there. All the four bonds should have four different species attached to it. For example, this. Look at this molecule. I have what? Assume this is hydrogen, this is CH3, this is let's say chlorine, and assume this is bromine. So there are four different attachments over here. So you can see it through the color difference also. So the carbon, or not carbon, but any other atom which is sp3 and has four different attachments or four different groups attached to it, will be called as chiral center. Okay, though the chiral center is a term majorly used for carbons, but that doesn't mean that it works only for carbon. The atom should be sp3 and the attachment should be different. That is the main criteria to be called as chiral center. Okay, so it's not necessary that only carbon can be chiral center. Other atoms can also be chiral center, but again, two conditions: it should be sp3 and should have different attachments on it. The attachments or the substituents should not be same. So I have shown you this. This is your chiral carbon. So the black thing which is in the center is the chiral carbon. Okay, here I am talking specifically about carbon, but you can have any other atom also which can show the similar properties. So now we have got it. What is chiral center? Chiral center is the atom which is sp3 hybridized and has different attachments on it. That particular atom can be carbon or can be a non-carbon atom also. So sp3 atom can be carbon or non-carbon atom. Now comes the important point, that is optical activity has nothing to do with this chiral carbon, though this is the term, or chiral center will be used very often, but the presence and the absence of chiral center is not a mandatory condition. It is there. If we will be seeing we will see a lot of similarities, or we will see a lot of incidents where the chiral center would be, those particular compounds will be optically active, but that's not a mandatory condition for a compound to be optically active. That means a compound, an organic compound, can be optically active even without the presence of chiral center. So the presence or absence of the chiral center is no way to tell you whether a compound is optically active or not, though it helps a lot in many cases, but it is not at all a mandatory condition. We will be seeing the cases where you have chiral centers in your compound and still it is optically inactive, and the other way around. We will see the cases where the compound is optically active but it doesn't have the chiral center. So we will be dealing with all type of such compounds. Okay, so presence or absence of the chiral center is no criteria for optical activity. So when this chiral center is not a mandatory condition, why are we even talking about it? We are talking about it because in certain cases, the presence of chiral center can define and can tell you that the compound is optically active, but not in all type of compounds. So let's see in which case we are sure that if the chiral center is present, then it will be optically active. So the case where the presence of chiral center can ensure that optical activity is present, or your compound is optically active and will be able to shift the plane of the plane polarized light to the certain angle, those cases are very limited, or you can say those cases are not all the cases of optical activity, but there are still some cases if there is a presence of chiral center, then it will be optically active. But as I mentioned, it is not true for all the cases. So for which case it will be true? Let's see. If there is only one chiral center present in the molecule, only one chiral center, that means the whole molecule, there is only one carbon or non-carbon atom which is chiral center. In that case, it is necessary that that compound will be optically active. What do I mean? Let me just show you. Let's say I have a compound CH3, C2H5, Cl, and Br. This is a compound. So in this compound, there is only one carbon, this carbon, which is chiral center, and hence it will be optically active for sure. Okay, how, why, that will be learning going forward when we'll talk about the symmetries and how symmetry affects the optical activity of the compound. So you will get the reason for it, but for now just understand there is only one carbon. Total number of carbons are present in this compound are 4. Only one carbon is the chiral center over here, and hence it will be surely, this compound will surely be optically active. But just in case, if I had a compound like this, CH3C, C2H5, hydrogen C, C2H5, hydrogen, and CH3. Let's say this is my compound. Okay, now look at this carbon. Do it has 4 different attachments? No, so this cannot be a chiral center. Look at this carbon. Does it has 4 different attachments? One is CH3, one is C2H5, one is hydrogen, and one is this whole thing. So all 4 attachments are different. So yes, this is a chiral center. Okay, let's talk about the next carbon. Next carbon has C2H5, CH3, hydrogen, and this whole thing as an attachment. Again, the 4 groups are different. So rest of the part will be treated as one group only. Okay, not just the immediate carbon. The whole other thing, leftover thing, will be considered as one group. This is also chiral center. Now, whether this compound is optically active or not, it will depend on many other factors, not only these chiral centers. It has 2 chiral centers. This compound has 2 chiral centers, but it doesn't ensure that this will have the optical activity. Presence of optical activity also depends on many other factors which we have to look upon before mentioning that this particular compound is optically active. Only in the case, only and only in the case where there is only one single chiral center, we can say that this compound is optically active without even looking at other factors. Okay, so for this compound, I cannot define it right now whether it is optically active or not. We will be able to after some time once we'll start learning the symmetry. But for now, the presence of 2 chiral centers are not ensuring the presence of optical activity in this molecule. Okay, so I hope this is clear. 2 important things. First is presence of chiral center doesn't ensure the optical activity in the molecule, but if there is only one chiral center in your whole molecule, then your compound must be optically active. Okay, now there is one exception to this rule, and that is when instead of carbon, if I have a nitrogen in the molecule and nitrogen is sp3. Look at this nitrogen is sp3 over here, right? And that nitrogen is tertiary amine. I mean, that nitrogen is because of the tertiary amine. If I have a tertiary amine which has 3 different R groups attached, so as I mentioned, for being the chiral center, what is required? The requirement is you have an sp3 atom. So here when you talk about the tertiary amine, nitrogen has one lone pair, then one R group, then another R group, and the third R group. Mandatorily these 3 R groups should be different. So all these 4 attachments are different. One is lone pair and 3 different R groups are there. So this is your tertiary amine. Okay, which is sp3 also, and which has 4 different groups also. Different groups also. So it is pretty much valid to be called as chiral center. But still, this will give you an optically inactive compound. This will be called as optically inactive compound, even though there is a presence of an sp3 atom, nitrogen, and four different attachments. Still, this particular species gives you an optically inactive compound. Why and how? This also we will discuss going forward. So you just note it down right now as an exception. Why does that happen? I have to discuss in the further classes. So this we will be discussing in detail, that why exactly this nitrogen, when passing both the criteria which are required for chiral center, then still why it is giving you an optically inactive compound. We will discuss it in the next few lectures once you'll get the better understanding about the optical isomerism. Till then, treat it as a fact. Okay, now let me ask you a few questions on whatever we have learned till now. So first thing, you explain me. Let's talk about some true and false. If you get a statement like a compound having one chiral center must be optically active, is it right or wrong? Is it true or false? This is false. Why? Why is it false? It is false because a compound having one chiral center must be optically active is not right. A compound having one chiral carbon is right. Because if that chiral center is nitrogen or tertiary amine, I mean the case is of tertiary amine and nitrogen is the chiral center, in that case that will become optically inactive. So only in the case of chiral carbon, one single chiral carbon in your whole molecule, if it is present, then it will make it optically active always. So another statement is a compound having one chiral carbon, then it must be optically active. Absolutely true. So this statement is true only and only if we are talking about chiral carbon, not chiral atom. So chiral atom or chiral center can be any other atom also. Here we have the exception of nitrogen, that nitrogen, even though it's one single chiral center in the compound, still it will give you an optically inactive compound. Okay, so this statement is wrong. Chiral center is wrong. Chiral carbon is right. So one single chiral carbon, if it is present in your carbon chain, in your molecule, then your compound must be optically active. But if that chiral center is nitrogen, then your compound will become optically inactive. So I hope now you would have got it what exactly is the chiral center means, and now we will talk about how to find out the chiral centers in a compound. So I have given some examples over here. Let's quickly go through it. So this is my compound. I have listed down 6 compounds over here. Try it out on your own very quickly and then I'll tell you the answers. Pause the video, try it out on your own. Okay, so now quickly see, look at this carbon. It has 3 hydrogens, cannot be chiral center. Look at the second carbon. What all point of attachments we have? One is CH3, one is Br, one is CH2, CH3, and another is hydrogen. So 4 different groups are present. So this is going to be chiral center. Chiral center can also be represented by star. Okay, what about the CH2? No, 2 same hydrogens are there, cannot be chiral center. What about CH3? Again 3 hydrogens are there, cannot be chiral center. Let's talk about the second one. Second one, this first carbon cannot be chiral center because 3 hydrogens are there. Let's go to the second carbon. Second carbon has one CH3, one OH, one this whole group over here, and one hydrogen. So 4 different groups are there. This can be chiral center. What about this? Third carbon, it has CH3, it has hydrogen, it has chlorine, and this whole molecule as the attachment. So this also has 4 different groups. Hence, there are 2 chiral centers over here. So 2 chiral centers here, 1 chiral center here. Let's talk about this compound. As I mentioned very clearly, chiral centers are the terms being used only for the sp3 atoms, cannot be used for the sp2 or sp atoms. So we are not going to check for this carbon at all. Okay, look at this carbon. It has one hydrogen, one OH, one this group, which is different from this. Okay, so definitely this is a chiral center. Let's go to this carbon. It has HOH, then CH2OH as one group, and this whole thing as another group. So definitely this is also a chiral center. About this, the last carbon, there are 2 hydrogens here. That means 2 species are repeating. It cannot be chiral center. So how many chiral centers are there? 2. Now let's talk about this compound. Now this compound has CH3, CH2, CH2, CH3, and the carbon in the center. So CH3 has 3 hydrogens, cannot be chiral center, has 2 hydrogens, cannot be chiral center. What about this carbon? This carbon has C2H5 here, C2H5 here, hydrogen here and iodine here. This also has 2 same groups on both the ends. So this cannot have any chiral center, so no chiral center. Okay, let's talk about this compound. This compound, this carbon, I mean, you can check all the carbons, but this is CH2, CH2, CH2. So when two hydrogens are there, these cannot be chiral centers, and this is sp2 hybridized carbons. We will not even check for it. So let's talk about this carbon. This carbon has methyl. One, it has hydrogen. Another, it has unsymmetric chain. You go from here, this will become one chain. You go from here, it will become another chain, and hence it is a chiral center. Okay, so basically you know how to resolve a cyclic chain when it comes to figure out what all two different branches are there. Or you could simply see that when you go from here, it crosses CH2, and when you go from here, it is CH. So difference immediately in the two areas, okay, or immediately in the two bonds. Now look at this compound. In this compound, let's figure out the chiral centers. We will not check for benzene because it is sp2 hybridized. We have to specifically check for sp3 carbons. So this is our one sp3 carbon. This is another sp3 carbon. This is also sp3. This is also sp3. This is sp3. This is sp3. This is sp3. This is sp3, and this nitrogen is sp3. Here, I'm not asking whether it is giving you the optical activity or not. I'm just asking which all are the chiral centers. Okay. So look at this. It has one methyl group present over here. It has one methyl over here, and then unsymmetric chain this end, unsymmetric chain this end, and one hydrogen. So this is chiral center. Same is the case for the second one, where the chlorine is. Same is the case for OH, same is the case for fluorine, same is the case for the carbon where the COH is. Same is the case where the nitrogen is attached. This is one group, this is another area here, this is another area here, and hydrogen. This carbon is also a chiral center. And what else? This nitrogen is also a chiral center because this has three groups attached. One is this big group, then this ethene, then this methyl, and then a lone pair. So how many total chiral centers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. My bad, not 7. Apart from that, do we have any other chiral centers? Let's see. So look at this carbon over here. I have not spoken about this carbon at all. So I have this carbon over here. This carbon has one group attached like this, another group attached like this. Both of the groups are different. Then it is attached to a carbon over here, which is also different. And then there is hydrogen. So this can also be a chiral center, and this can also be a chiral center. So total, how many chiral centers are there? I have made it a little clumsier. Let me just clean it up a bit. So this carbon is a chiral center. This carbon is a chiral center. This carbon, this carbon, this, and this nitrogen. So how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So 9 chiral centers are there. Okay. So I hope you would have got it how to find out the chiral centers. I'll give you a few more questions. Try it out on your own, and then I can ask you these in the class, or you can tell me the answers for these questions in the class. Let me just write it down. Okay, so these are the ones which are written in the blue color. Try out on your own, find out the number of chiral centers present in these compounds. Now, in the next class, we'll talk about chirality, what exactly the chirality means, and what is the difference between chirality and chiral center, and what is the relation between chirality and chiral center. Is there any relation or not? And then we will talk about the different type of symmetries which are required to understand the optical activity in a compound. Okay, so next class, chirality and symmetry is what we will deal with. Till then, go through it, try to understand it, keep your mental eye open, keep your 3D eye open, and try to relate the things what exactly we are talking about, because from the next class onwards you will require more 3D visualization of the molecule. More you'll be able to visualize it, more easier it will be for you to understand the optical isomerism. Okay, so learn this, understand this, ask me if you have any doubt in the next class, and then we will go to chirality and symmetry, different type of symmetries which a molecule possess, and how that symmetry affects the optical activity of a compound.